Welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm David Hargreaves. With me today I have Tony Alexander, the Chief Economist of the BNZ, and we're going to talk a little bit about housing. Tony, you've said that you think the current house up cycle, as it is, has about 3 years to run. What do you base that on?
Yeah, basically it's best guess in that history shows that when a cycle in anything gets going, you never know exactly when it's going to peak or at what level the prices are going to peak. A lot of it is really driven by, I guess, the extent of the shortage of property that I see in Auckland in particular. My belief that we're going to struggle to actually correct that shortage, and so we're going to get some quite strong uplift in prices, but also a feeling of when is the Reserve Bank really going to get interest rates cranking, how long will it take them to get to painful levels at which the market starts turning the other way, and I've got a best guess on that at about 3 years at the moment for the peak in the interest rate cycle.
Okay, now within what's been going on in the property market, there's been a lot of talk about overseas buyers coming in, fueling the boom, forcing prices up. Now, in conjunction with the Real Estate Institute, in your monthly survey, for the first time this month, you did some sort of proper analysis on where buyers actually came from. Can you just summarise a little bit what the results of that actually were?
Yeah, what you find is, first of all, nationwide, about 25% of all the buyers out there are first home buyers, and you've got maybe 18 to 19% are investors from wherever they come from. And again, nationwide, about 9% of the buyers are people who are located offshore. For Auckland, that's about 11%. I then asked, okay, where are the offshore buyers located? And nationwide, the top country was the United Kingdom at around about 18% of all the offshore buyers, then China at about 15%, and Australia at about 14%. For Auckland, China came first at around about 19%, and the UK was still around about 18%. So there's a wee bit of extra dominance of the Chinese buyers in Auckland, but not necessarily astoundingly so.
So in terms of people who are buying houses in New Zealand and don't actually intend to live in New Zealand, what was the overall percentage?
Yeah, exactly, because I also asked the agents of the buyers how many have said yes, they're going to move, how many have said no, and the don't knows. And what I did was basically, to answer your question, I looked at the no's, how many said definitely not coming, and then the don't knows, split the don't knows in half, and you add them together and you say, well, what proportion of the 11% of people who are buying properties from offshore in Auckland are going to stay overseas? 4.6% of all properties sold in Auckland at the moment are going to basically investors overseas. Nationwide, it works out at around about 4%. And if you're looking at China in particular, it seems to be a particular area of interest for many people. About 0.8% of properties in Auckland are being sold to people in China who are going to stay across there.
Now, were you surprised how low those percentages actually are?
Well, I guess yes, based on the anecdotes that people have been throwing at me for the past, 6 to 9 months in particular, of Asian buyers at the auctions, etc. And I had a few people emailing me afterwards saying the numbers just don't gel with what they're seeing out there. And I think one of the reasons for that is that a lot of people are talking about the prime school zones. We know for Asians in particular, there's a heavy emphasis on education. I mean, who doesn't have that, I guess, generally? But the school zones, there's certainly a prime dominance across there. On the North Shore, people talked about it, but that's where a lot of people go as migrants. We do now have the Chinese, for instance, the second largest net addition from migrants to our population now coming from China, just behind the United Kingdom, for instance. So I thought maybe the numbers were a little bit on the low side, but then I went just the other day and found a similar survey by the National Association of Realtors in the United States, and they came up with a number of about 4.5% of sales of houses in the United States go to foreigners staying across there. I got about 4% nationwide for New Zealand, similar sort of measures. I'm in the ballpark, that's what I think.
So, I mean, in terms of, it's a very hot topic of conversation. Is it just xenophobia, or is this a discussion we should be having in terms of offshore buyers?
It's most definitely a discussion that we should be having. One of the key publications I've got is a monthly thing called Growing with China. I started in early 2012, and my aim there is to educate people about the economic growth of China, the recovery of its civilization, and its engagement with the rest of the world. And that engagement for New Zealand so far has primarily manifested itself itself in trade. We have about 17% of our export receipts now, physical goods, come from China. 14 months ago, that was about 7%, so the growth is phenomenal. And if we look at the tourism sector, we've got about 13 to 14% of total visitor spending in New Zealand is now coming from China. Maybe $1 billion coming from Chinese students, etc., studying in New Zealand. And what I'm wanting to point out to people is that with goods and services export flows always come investment flows, and one aspect of that investment is purchases of residential property. And a key point to note here is that if we look at the government's China strategy document from early 2012, they had one of the figures in there of about 57 million Chinese earning something like over 10,000 maybe US dollars per annum. This number will quadruple in the next 10 years. Well, whatever we are seeing now in terms of Asian buying generally of properties in New Zealand, the numbers will grow strongly in the next few years, and I think the growth is probably accelerating at the moment as we've had new restrictions placed upon foreign purchases of properties in Hong Kong and Singapore, and an increase now in inquiry in New Zealand. So we need a debate on this.
Yes, I mean, obviously in Australia, for example, they talk about restricting overseas buyers to just new houses. Is that something that we should be considering?
I think that's probably the point that we should be moving to if we're looking at legislation. So this is for buyers from everywhere, basically. In Australia, if you're a Kiwi and Aussie, you can go for your life. If you're a foreigner, you can't buy an existing house, one that's already been occupied, but you can buy a new one that hasn't been occupied before. And I think that would be useful in New Zealand in the context of there is a shortage of property in Auckland in particular. And so if you've got people wanting to get a holding in New Zealand, if they are contributing to the supply of houses, I'd consider that quite a positive thing, quite frankly. It's not anti-foreigner. It's simply, I think, just partly a reflection of the supply situation in New Zealand and the way the world is going. In many countries, you simply don't have free rein to buy whatever you want. If you're coming from overseas, it's a natural thing.
So how urgently do we need to have that debate and look at that situation, do you think?
I don't think it's urgent at this stage, in that I don't for a second believe that it is primarily overseas buying which is driving the housing market in Auckland in particular. Now, maybe if you're talking about your Epsom, Remuera, etc., well, go for your life in that regard. Frankly, that's really not relevant to the bulk of Aucklanders, I would suggest. It's certainly not relevant for the main problem in Auckland, which is the affordable housing area. But if we look at the numbers there, like I say, only about 4.6% of Auckland houses are being sold offshore at the moment. 5% of your housing stock turns over maybe per annum, so if somebody can do the maths there, maybe that's 0.2% or similar of Auckland's housing stock is going to offshore owners. These are gross numbers. Every year there are also offshore owners who are selling the property they bought some years earlier as well. So the net loss ownership of property overseas, I think, is even less than the numbers I've been giving there. But I would really like to see a good professional debate about it.
Yeah, and so I guess the biggest problem in Auckland obviously is supply, and at the moment we've got a local council and a government who seem a little bit at odds on how you achieve that. How urgently does Auckland need to address its shortage of new housing stock?
Well, the shortage is phenomenally large, and it's getting larger as each month goes by. And my warning for 5 years has been we are going to see this crisis developing in New Zealand. And in fact, we've lost 5 years of working on this issue, because if we go back to late 08, early 09, I gave a forecast that because we had a shortage of houses already in Auckland in particular, prices would only fall maybe 10 to 15%. There were other forecasts out there that house prices are going to fall 40%, the unemployment rate's going to 14%, etc. And I think because people felt, the affordability problem is going to be solved, nothing was done about it. And we've lost 5 years simply because we had this belief of house prices were going to plummet away. What you have now is strong awareness of the shortage, but in a way, it's too late. We have the official estimates of Auckland shortages, 20 to 30,000 houses. We need to be building 13,000 per annum. It's not going to happen. End of story. If you look at the past 20 years, at one point in about 2005, the annual number of consents got to about 12,920 or so. It has been below the long-term Auckland average of 7 to 7,500 since the start of 2007. We're only about 4,600 now. And by the time even Auckland gets to its average level of construction of houses, 7 to 7,500, we're going to run out of builders. They're going to be down in Christchurch. They've already gone to Australia. They've left the sector. We haven't done the apprenticeships. So the supply simply is not going to come forward. The prices go up. And like I say, I think maybe there's 3 years worth of that. And it's not just, like I say, the overseas buyers. The bigger driving force would be 4 years worth of young people who've sat there thinking house prices are going to drop. Now this 4 years is stacked on top of each other trying to buy. And investors who thought, removal of the use of LAQCs for tax purposes, maybe that will depress the market. Or depreciation changes, maybe that will depreciate it. No, lower the market. It didn't happen. Now investors are catching up on buying as well. There's a lot of momentum left yet.
Yeah, so for the economy as a whole, that's going to keep it pretty buoyant this year, I guess. What about the potential counter effect of the drought? Where do you see the economy?
Yeah. The thing about a drought is that you never know the economic impact until the drought is finished. You can start to make some decent calculations, and it clearly is not finished yet. But there's a very large stimulus to our economy to come from the construction sector. You've got irrigation projects being put up around the country, and obviously they're going to accelerate now because of the drought. There's the rebuilding of Christchurch, a $30 billion job with maybe $3 billion spent so far. Houses, CBD and infrastructure, over a period of 3 to 10 years there. Auckland's period of catch-up house construction. There will be new office buildings, factories, warehouses, farm buildings put up around the country because we did not go into the global financial crisis with massive excess construction of those properties either. So housing, undersupply, commercial properties, maybe sort of a decent supply. So you've got a very strong stimulus to our economy coming from the domestic part. The exports, completely different story. They're slammed by the drought, and we've already got tourism numbers overall going backwards, and the high currency, it's going to go higher because the rule there is that the Kiwi dollar goes up when the housing market goes up, so there's 3 years for you, and the Kiwi dollar goes up when interest rates start going up. They haven't even started going up yet. So, yeah, I'm sorry to give a message to the exporters of you ain't seen anything yet as far as the currency goes.
So a very mixed picture on what they like to call imbalances, I think.
It's going to be a very, very imbalanced period of growth in the economy. And it's naturally that's what you'd expect when you've got the rebuilding of Christchurch in particular. Clearly it's domestically focused and it's construction focused, and construction activity is just so domestic, as it were. For every house that gets built, maybe there's another 10 jobs that gets created as a result of that. It has maybe a 1 to 3 multiplier on the rest of the economy spread all over the place. So domestic driven upturn in the economy. Current account deficit blows out. Eventually the overseas investors say that seems a bit extreme, but while the interest rates are high and rising, they're not too worried about it. And this is all to play out over, I'm guessing, 3 years. Ask me in a year's time, I may have a different profile because, look, the level of unknown, especially overseas, is still relatively high.
Okay, plenty to go on with there. Thank you very much, Tony Alexander from the BNZ. I'm David Hargreaves for interest.co.nz.